What is cannibalism? It is the act of consuming one another of the same species as you are. Also, is an ecological interaction in the animal kingdom. But what could cause the occurrence of such non-ordinary habits? Luckily, and for some poor folks rather unfortunately, cannibalism is kind of well documented through our history. Let's talk about its whys, dangers, and some unnerving benefits. First off, in the animal kingdom. Cannibalism increases as food gets scarce, or when animals just feel like doing it. Sometimes I really can't protect them, I mean, just tag along, you will get it. Such self-species eating animals are polar bears, cats, chimpanzees, rats, lions, rabbits, hamsters, scorpions, bunnies, rattlesnakes, and chickens. Now for them, they are called filial cannibals, the ones whom eat their own offsprings, yippies and owls. For the yippies, we get older members of the pack getting a higher chance to survive. For the owls, we get straightforward children genocide as well as a slowly but steadily decreasing survival rate of the whole population. Who would think that bashing in the head of your own kind will backfire somewhere on the long run? Anyhow, moving on to matrophagy. This is the condition when organisms feed on their own mother. It's mostly found at spiders, insects, nematode worms, scorpions, and crabs. Crab mothers provide unfertilized eggs for their younglings, but the little lardaces need more to function as fucking newborns, so they eat their mothers too, for the shits and giggles. Another family-friendly example are the caecilians. They are limbless amphibians that look like giant worms, and while the mothers don't give their lives to the younglings, they feed them with their flesh, as in the younglings have specialized temporary teeth that is used to peel off the layers of their mother's skin, and when the skin grows back, they can have some more. How delightful. This procedure takes up, give or take, 3 months. Yippies and owls. For the yippies, we have younglings having a kickstart at life. For the owls, we have eating your own mother. Moving on to sibling rivalry, which works kinda similar to matrophagy, considering that you still feed on your family, but instead of their mama, the siblings, hence the name, eat each other. This for to gain more attention from their parents, as well as to get more resources. So sibling rivalry is a form of cannibalism, and siblicide is the act of consuming. Examples are blue-footed booby and spotted hyenas. Spotted hyenas start infight from birth and continue it for a couple of days. Although it doesn't always lead to the death of one, but it is needed to form hierarchy between the litter. You would think that fighting from the moment of birth is a little over-exaggerate, but there's a form of infight that starts from the womb. This form of mischieving is called intrauterine cannibalism. It can take form in several, forms. One is embryophagy, when animals eat each other in the embryo phase. Such cases are sand tiger sharks, where the first embryo to reach a certain size and strength consumes the less developed. The chosen ones are called hatchlings. Fun fact is that different embryos can come from different fathers, so this form of siblicide can be the first form of indirect male competition as well. The other form is oophagy, or ovophagy, where it's kind of a mix of what I told you with the crab stuff, but with fertilized eggs. The word's meaning is literally egg eating. Growing up a bit from being silly little babies and turning into deadly grown-ups, we are going to talk about fatal attractions, or sexual cannibals, if you prefer the sound of a pig squeal metal band. These animals, whom are mostly females, devour their partner during or after mating. Examples are... you shouldn't be surprised, they are the same old weird fellas. They are arachnids, insects, crustaceans, gastropods, and snakes. As studies say, although it's kind of hard for me to comprehend, being eaten can prolong the time spent during mating, which of course increases the chance of fertilization. After killing their mates, will not mate again for a period of time to reduce the competition between the deceased male and other males. Not as he can go any farther with that, but it's kind of sweet, I think. So by covering really just the top layer of our topic with animals, let's move on to the spicy stuff, the goody goods. Now comes the human part of the story. Let's go back to the basics for just a couple of thoughts, then we can deep dive into the juicy part. What does one need to do to become a cannibal? Well, they need to practice cannibalism, which is consuming of said species, now humans. This sounds pretty plain and simple to follow so far. Neo-cannibals generally fall into 2 subgroups. Ones are suffering from severe schizophrenia, the others have mixed personality disorder with sadistic and psychopathic features associated with paraphilia. Sadistic features, or sadism, is the joy from seeing, but usually making, another person being physical pain inflicted on. Schizophrenia is a mental disorder that makes the endurer connect to hallucinations with most of their senses. Psychopathy, when someone has low or lack of empathy and remorse and is high on egocentrism. Paraphilia is the contrast of normophilia, which is considered as the view of having normal sexual thoughts. Paraphilia, to put short, is having a sexual urge towards anything out of the norm. Although the norm isn't a clear and sharp group accepted by everyone, but paraphilic people tend to easily cross these borders. Consider all that newcome knowledge, you can already see we are in for a hell of a ride. You see, from the start we can see a pretty pattern here, that cannibalism comes hand in hand with other mental problems. Take a look at some of the reasons that I have found humanity used to get behind on munching on each other. By distance, let's call it, there are two subgroups called endo and exocannibals. Endocannibalism is a practice of cannibalism in one's own locality or community, of course including family. And exocannibalism is the plain opposite. You eat people outside your neighborhood or straight up your enemies. Let's take a look what form of cannibalism took place in these groups. In both, we can find ritual cannibalism and actions of desperate measures, but with slightly different implications. You see, ritual cannibalism done in your community was a sign of respect and a spiritual way for the deceased soul to live in the bodies of the descendants, and grant them good characteristics and power. It went hand in hand with funerary cannibalism, which had the same tough process but was done at the burying site, and they consumed different parts of the body. Most popular organs were the heart, the brain, and the liver. The South African Majoran people practiced endocannibalism alongside with the Amahuca Indians of Peru, whom picked particles of bones out of the ashes of the cremation fire, ground them with corn, and drank them as a kind of oatmeal. On the other hand, exoritual cannibalism was a sign of humiliation and domination. It was usually a celebration of victory against a rival tribe. The process was the same, but instead of glorifying the dead, they thought that consuming the enemy will enslave their souls and give power to them in that way. Well, it kinda did. Only if by that you mean Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, which in short, it's a degenerative brain disorder that came with the superpowers of behavior changes, poor coordination, visual disturbances, and later on, dementia, involuntary movements, blindness, weakness, and coma. Give or take, around 70% people die within a year of diagnosis. The main thing between animal and human cannibalism seems to be spirituality, sexual preference, and mental problems. Well, most of the time at least, there are set examples when humans were consumed as a source of nutrition, often cases not led by a harming intent but purely for survival. These cases are called desperate measures. They usually happened after a crash, at long sea trips, and at war times. There was no spirituality with this one, high and mighty thoughts or banishing deeds. These are actions to stay alive. Killing someone for food, for food as in eating them, is called homicidal cannibalism, while being little vultures and picking on the dead is necrocannibalism. Now, as in levels, homicidal cannibalism was more common and less desperate, so to say. In almost every necro case there was a homicidal part. In 1884, a crew of 4 men had to take a 4-meter-long lifeboat after they got into a storm. Their names were Dudley, Stephen, Brooks, and Parker. On the lifeboat there were only a few equipment for navigation, no drinking water, and 2 cans of turnip. The first day, the crew had to fight off a shark and was around 1.1 thousand kilometers from land. Dudley, on the second day, portioned the turnips for the crew, which lasted for 2 days. Not because it was plenty, but because it was strategical. On the next day, Brooks spotted a turtle, Stephen caught it, and it fed the crew for a second week. Mind you, we are talking roughly about 1.4 kilograms of turtle meat and 4 people. The crew drank its blood until it got contaminated with seawater. After a few unlucky days without rain, the only remaining liquid that they could drink, which was not the seawater, was their own urine. By day 15, Parker became really ill from the seawater, and Stevens became unwell also. Around day 16, the debate of who should they sacrifice to survive started to get fierce. Dudley planned on eating Parker. The reasoning behind it was that Parker was gravely ill and merely 17 years old, while Dudley and Stevens had wives and kids. No entry on Brooks' health, he probably had a better than Parker. Anyhow, Brooks had no meaning in stopping the other two or assisting them. On day 17, they made their decision. Stephen said a prayer as they stood upon the young man, held him down, and cut his jugular vein, which is located in the neck. They wanted to kill the boy before he dies naturally to be sure that his blood is still drinkable. On day 23rd, the crew was rescued. Oh, and also I almost forgot to mention one funny way to become a cannibal. Auto-cannibalism. It is the act of consuming yourself, in most cases partially. Some cases are Elizabeth Bathory, Hungarian countess who forced servants to eat their own flesh, a 66-year-old man mutilating his fingers by biting on them for years, which resulted in losing the top segment on both hands, and Andrew Lee Thomas, convicted murderer of his wife and 2 children and death row inmate. After removing his right eye in 2004, he removed his left eye in 2008 and ate it. We became kinda grim by the end of it, didn't we? Well, I have some stories from different eras of history, and I think you will find them interesting. Let's start off by my favorite name of the video, Cheddar Man. In the prehistoric era, there was a specific human skeleton called Cheddar Man. He was cannibalized for the brains and marrow, and not trying to go into details that much, it was some old school caveman homicide. In early history, we got Phalaris, tyrant of Agrigento. Reportedly consumed suckling babies, which you get 0 drawings on that one. Moving on. First millennium. Emperor Wu of Liang allowed prisoners of war to be traded for. They were caged, and whenever there was a demand for meat, some of them were taken out, cut, broiled, and consumed. Mainly because of famine and war times, soldiers consumed their enemies, until the Tang dynasty, when consuming human flesh was considered a form of medication. More on that later. Oh, the bright Middle Ages. Crusaders. Some crusaders were reported for practicing cannibalism in the First Crusade around 1097 and 8, at the Siege of Antioch. The crusaders succeeded in 2 sieges, but by the end of it almost all of the horses died and the army suffered grave losses. Siege of Marra has many more entries to fatten our topic. It took place in 1098, when many crusaders got caught by eyewitnesses of consuming Muslim bodies, and is actually acknowledged by nearly a dozen Christian chronicles. Most of the entries say that the unholy feast began after the end of the siege, and was purely motivated by hunger. Well, one of the entries say that human flesh was traded openly on the streets. After the Crusaders comes yet again a spiritual way to approach things. Allegedly, some Tibetan monks consumed pills that contained the flesh of the deceased. It was for them to help in their way to spiritual enlightenment. There was really not much information about this ritual, so let's put a little question mark next to it. Leaving the pacifist playthrough and entering murder hobo mode, we will talk about nomadic people, especially Mongols. Since Mongols were nomads, they were seesawing between starvation and feasts. And killing humans was no different from killing a bear, really. I mean morally, so to say. Several chroniclers stated that Mongols have engaged in cannibalism. Some of them say it was purely from hunger, some others think it was to instill fear towards their enemies. According to Ivo of Narbonne, who was in the city of Wiener Neustadt, female breast was a delicacy served between Mongol leaders. On July 21, 1514, the captured Hungarian rebel leader György Dózsa was condemned to sit on a smoldering heated iron throne, and forced to wear a heated iron crown and scepter, mocking his ambitions to be a king. While he was suffering, 9 other rebels got led to his throne, whom were starved beforehand. Next, the executioner stabbed hot iron into Dózsa's flesh, basically cooking his meat at spots, and ordered the rebels to bite out the scorched spots. The 3 or 4 who refused were simply cut up, prompting the others to comply. In the end, Dózsa didn't survive the torturing, while the rebels who obeyed were released. We have reached yet another milestone. I want to explain further what is medical cannibalism. You see, back in the early ages there were attempts to use human parts for medical applications. And well, they continued to do that later on. It was said that gladiator blood heals epilepsy, as well as human fat is used in homemade remedies and skincare. Blood was considered the life essence of the body, so by drinking it people thought to cure all kinds of diseases and illnesses. Some say it's best tapped from the living or after one's death. The poor couldn't really pay for processed compounds, so they stood in line at public executions with their little cups, paid a drinking fee, and tapped the recently executed. The executioner was considered a healer at Germanic countries around the late 1670s. England's King Charles II took medication made from human skulls after suffering a seizure. And until 1909, physicians commonly used human skulls to treat neurological conditions. The cocktail after his name looked a little like human skulls dipped in alcohol. That's it. Oh, and they also ate the moss on top of the buried skulls too for good measures. For the royal and social elite, eating mummies seemed a royally appropriate medicine, as doctors claimed mumia was made from pharaohs. Mummies were a prescribed medicine for the next 500 years. So basically, Victoria-era Englishman cuisine caused a shortage in worldwide mummy quantity. Not everyone was convinced. Guy de la Fontaine, a royal doctor, doubted that mumia was a useful medicine, and so forged mummies made from dead peasants in Alexandria in 1564. He realized people could be conned. They were not always consuming genuine ancient mummies. Of course, wartime gives birth to many man-made horrible situations. Let's see one more from the not-so-far past. In the example, I will speak about Japanese soldiers, but I could easily find any war crimes committed by any country on the internet. None of the following goes against any nation, and since it's a relatively recent happening, I do not wish to add any joke parts into this segment. March 1945. A bunch of Japanese soldiers tried to avoid the Americans. Withdrawing from the mountain of Basak, Japanese soldiers met problems that led to fatal casualties, such as beriberi, salt hunger, malaria, and diarrhea. Beriberi means I cannot. It's caused by lack of vitamin B1, and the symptoms are fast heart rate, shortness of breath, numbness in the legs and feet, and eventually partial paralysis. Salt hunger means your body lacks of sodium, which is responsible for the water balancing in your body. 5% loss in sodium levels is lethal. Malaria. It's an infectious disease that causes vomiting, fever, headaches, coma, and organ failure. So eventually the lack of food led to cannibalism. According to First Lieutenant Hajime Ainoda, medical doctor, the Suzuki unit ate human flesh as a result of desperate physical condition of malnutrition, salt deficiency, and food shortage. In August 1945, one family was murdered and their bodies were eaten. Then an unknown man was shot and eaten. In October 1945, Japanese soldiers captured a father with his 2 daughters. The daughters eventually escaped, but their father was cut up and eaten by the troops. They continued this practice until 1947, but eventually they had to commit endocannibalism. Whenever possible, they avoided killing people by eating the bodies of those who died from illness, killed in action, or executed for crimes. Certain events after their encounter with the Philippine army resulted in them disposing the casualties. However, later some of the troops took a rotten slab of meat from one of the dead. In their desperation, 4 days before the Japanese surrender on February 9, 1947, they buried their fallen comrade at 4 p.m., and on that night, around 10:30 p.m., 2 soldiers asked permission to dig up the body of their fallen comrade and consume it. As a gesture of esprit de corps, all of them gathered and partook the flesh of the dead soldier. Esprit de corps is a French phrase, which means is the spirit of the group, the power that keeps them together to reach their goals.